Hi, welcome back. This is Beersborn. In today's video, we're going to start talking about how we can create a system so that our player character has health. Right now, our players can't be hurt, right? Our main character can just sit and take a bunch of attacks from an enemy and nothing really happens because we haven't created a health system for our player character. And that's an important thing. If we're thinking about our core gameplay loop, we have to have some kind of obstacle that prevents our players from reaching their objective, right? And the enemy damage is the most prominent way of creating that obstacle. So let's talk about how we can create a life system for the player character. Now to do that, we're going to use a new type of variable. There's basically two different types of variables in Construct. You have instance variables, and we've talked about instance variables a bunch, right? If you click on any particular object, like an enemy or the main character, they have their instance variables that we can create. Those variables are attached to specific objects. Like these are the variables for this specific beetle. These are the variables for this specific player character. But all those instance variables disappear and are reset whenever you go to a new part of the game. So say, for example, we go to a new level. All those instance variables would reset. For something like a life total, we want to have a variable that has consistency throughout the game. It's called a global variable. And the way that we create a global variable is by going to the event sheet and we right-click anywhere in the white space of the event sheet. And you'll see in this menu, there's an option for Add Global Variable. Let's click on that. We're going to make two global variables for our player character's life system. The first one is going to represent the maximum amount of HP or hit points, life, that your player character has. I'm going to call this max HP. It won't let you do spaces, so I did a little underscore. HP here stands for hit points or health or life total. The type is going to be a number, and the initial value is whatever you want it to be. How much life do you want your player character to have at a maximum? It can be 10, it can be 100, it can be anything. So I'm going to do 100 on mine. And then click OK. Now, because this is a global variable, it just kind of keeps them at the top of your event sheet. It's not attached to any one specific object. It's just kind of hanging out here at the top. Now let's make a second global variable. This one's going to represent the current amount of HP that your player character has at any one time. So I'm going to call it current HP. The type is a number, and the initial value should probably be the max HP number, whatever you did for the last instance variable. So I'm going to do 100. Now it doesn't have to be, but what this represents is like the starting amount of life that your player character is going to have. So if you wanted to, you could have your players start at like 50% life or something. You could. That seems kind of cruel, but I'm going to do mine at 100 so they start with full life. So two global variables, one for the maximum amount of HP they can have, and one set for the current amount of HP that they have. Great. Now this next part might seem kind of familiar. It's not too different than what we did with the enemies, actually. We're going to add a new event. For this event, we're going to use our main character. Mine is called Goblin, whatever your main character is. And we're going to do on collision with another object. Let's double click on that. And we're going to click to choose. Now we have to decide what is going to hurt our player character right now. And we have some options, right? We have a couple different enemies. And then we also have stuff like enemy attack boxes, right? The enemy attack hitboxes and projectiles. Let's focus just on enemy 1 right now. Now we have an option, and this is something that you're going to have to decide. In your game, do you want your player to be able to touch the enemies without getting hit as long as the enemy is not attacking? What I mean by that is, like, if I start my game, you can see that my enemies play their attack animation when they're attacking, right? If I touch an enemy when they're not attacking, is that going to hurt my player, or do they only get damage when the enemy is attacking? Now, there's no right or wrong answer here. Some games, like if you think about a classic Mario game, if Mario hits an enemy, at any point Mario takes damage. Or you can have games that are like a Dark Souls style game, where the player can actually run into the enemy and not take damage as long as the enemy is not actually physically attacking, is not swinging their weapon at that moment. What I'm going to do is make it so that my player can only be hurt when the enemy is attacking. So because of that, what I'm going to use is the enemy 1 attack hitbox. If you want to make it so that the enemy hurts your player as soon as they touch, then you can just do the whole enemy 1 if you prefer. Either one works. It's really a matter of preference. So I'm going to do the enemy 1 attack hitbox and click done. Now the action I'm going to add for this, I want to subtract a certain amount from the current HP global variable. Now the global variables are all under the system. Because they're not attached to any one specific object, they're under system. And you can see that there's a section for global variables. We're going to go to subtract from, and current HP, we have to decide what value we're going to subtract from our current HP. What is the amount of damage that this attack is going to do to our player character? By default, it's 1. If my life total is 100, subtracting 1 HP seems like pretty small, right? So I might make it 10, which would mean that every time I get hit by this specific attack, it'll take 10 away from my life total. Now, this is totally arbitrary. It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe your max HP is only 10 HP, and every time it gets hit, it subtracts 1. That's totally up to you. And you can always change this later. We can always go back and make adjustments to this to balance the game however you want. But I'm going to do mine subtract 10 from current HP. Now, if I try that out, it is technically working, although you wouldn't know it because there's nothing to communicate to the player that they're being damaged, right? The player character just sits there and there's no kind of frame of reference for how much life I have. So what I want to do is create something that tells the player when they get hit and maybe some kind of situation where they can see how much life they actually have. Now, an easy way to communicate to the player that they have taken damage is by making your player character flash after they've gotten hit. There's other options too. You can have distinctive animations for when they take damage. You can make them change color. You can do all kinds of stuff, but I think flash is easy. And we've already kind of established that when something flashes, that's when it's been hit, right? We did the same thing for the enemies. So what I'm going to do is go to my player character, click on it once, and I'm going to add a new behavior. And this behavior is going to be a flash. Go ahead and select that and close the behaviors window. And let's go back to our event sheet. And under this event, after it subtracts 10 HP, we'll add another action for the goblin or your main character and select flash. Now you can leave these settings as is. These first two are just how quickly it flashes, and the third one is how long it flashes for. I think 1 second is good. Now, every time you get hit, it'll briefly flash. Good. And this makes a lot more sense. You can really kind of understand as a player, okay, I've taken damage. Now let's create some kind of system that shows how much life we have. Now, eventually we're going to create a whole HUD. And a HUD, HUD, what that stands for is heads-up display. It's basically all the information that's on the screen that communicates to the player how much life they have, or how much of a certain resource they have, or what kind of items they have equipped, or whatever it might be. We're going to create a pretty complex graphic HUD at some point, but right now we're just going to make a very simple number that represents how much life we have. And this is mostly going to be for our reference. We'll end up changing this down the road to make it something that's a little bit more graphic, but for now, what we're going to do is we're going to make a new layer down here in the layers window. I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a layer at the top. I'm going to call this layer HUD, HUD, heads up display. Now over in the layout, I want to make sure that I have my HUD layer selected. I'm going to right click anywhere in the game space and insert a new object. Now this object is going to be text. We haven't done text before, so find the dotted line with a T in it for text. I'm going to call this text health text. And you can click anywhere and you can see that it puts a little tiny text box in there. Now we can adjust how big that text is and and the color of the text over here in the left panel. When we have our text box selected, you'll see that there's an option for size. I would recommend turning the size up. I'm going to make mine 30, so it's a little bit bigger, easier to read. I would also recommend changing the color of it, something that'll be different than your background. My tile background is kind of dark, right? So I'm going to change it to something lighter so it stands out against the background. You can also do other stuff like change the font if you want to. Feel free to mess around with that if you'd like. And what I'd recommend doing is taking that little text box and let's put it up in the top left corner. Now we're going to make it so that text is constantly updating with whatever the current HP global variable is. So let's go to the event sheet. We're going to add a new event. We're going to go to System, and we're going to go to every tick. Every tick means like constantly. And the action we're going to add is for our health text. Double click on that. If you go down to the bottom, you'll see an option for set text. It's highlighted in yellow. And we can set the text to be the current HP global variable. We want to delete the quotation marks here. We don't need quotation marks. And instead, start typing in the name that you named the current HP global variable. If you named it the same as mine, then it's current_HP. Yours might be different. It's whatever this name is up at the top. So now every second, even every fraction of a second, the text will be updated to whatever the current HP number is. And if you click play, you should now see that that number represents how much life you have. Now the problem is, if I move my character, it disappears, right? I can move away and then no longer see what that number is. We want everything that's on the HUD to follow along with the player. We want it to be like in the same place on the screen, no matter what's happening in the game, right? And there's an easy way to do that. If you go to the HUD layer and just click on it once in your layers window, over here on the left side panel, you'll see Parallax. You guys see that? What Parallax is, it's how quickly something moves on the screen. So if you have something that's 100% by 100%, then it moves at the same speed as everything else in the game. But if we change that to 0%, by 0%, that means that it will never move at all. It's always in the same spot on the screen. So if you place something on the top left, it'll always be in the top left. If you put something on the bottom center, it'll always be on the bottom center of the screen. So for the HUD layer, and just the HUD layer, you want the parallax to be 0 by 0. And now what I can do is test it out. I can let my player character be hit, and you can see that it's subtracting life from that 100 total. It's subtracting a lot of life though, right? It should only be taking away 10 HP from my 100 total every time it gets hit. But I'm already up to like -900, -1000 HP. The reason why it's taking away so much HP is because the computer runs so fast that it's tracking every split second when that attack hitbox from my enemy is overlapping on my player character and taking away life that entire time. So every time it's attacking me, it's actually hitting me for like 100 damage. So what we need to do is create a system that our player character can only get hit once, let's say every second. And then for that next second, it'll be invulnerable. So our player has a chance to react and dodge or counterattack or whatever it might be. So let's add that in. To do that, I'm going to give my player character one more instance variable. If I go over to the layout, click once on my player character, and I'm going to go to instance variables. I'm going to add a new instance variable called hurt. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it hurt because in my head, it represents like when my player's hurt and then they can't be hurt again. So the name can be whatever you want it to be, invincible, something like that, whatever makes sense to you. And the type is going to be a Boolean, a true/false statement. And let's click OK. Now let's go back to our event sheet, and we're going to go to this event that we made a minute ago. After it gets hit, it's going to subtract the life, it's going to flash, and let's add an action so that our player character sets Boolean for hurt to be true. So when it gets hit, it's hurt. Now we only want it to stay hurt for, let's say, 1 second. So I'm going to add another action. I'm going to go to System. I'm going to go down to Wait. I'm going to have it wait 1 second. And then after that 1 second is up, I'm going to turn hurt back to false. So I'm going to add another action for my main character. Set the Boolean for hurt to be false. So when it gets hit, it'll be hurt for a second, and then it won't be hurt anymore. Now, what we want to do is add one more condition over here on the left side of this event. You can add another condition by clicking on that tab over on the far left or in the gray space down below. And the condition that we're going to add is for our main character. We're going to go down to is Boolean instance variable set. And we're going to check to see if the player is hurt. Now, right now, if I were to read this event, what it says to me is that if the main character collides with the attack and it is already hurt, then we'll hurt it again, which doesn't really make sense, right? We only want it to be hurt if it's not already hurt. We want we want the main character to only be able to be hurt one time per attack, one time per second. So what we need to do is invert this condition. If I right-click on is hurt and go to invert, now what this means is that when it collides with an attack, if it's not already hurt, it'll subtract 10 from the current HP, it'll flash, it'll turn hurt to true so it can't be hurt again, it'll wait 1 second, turn hurt to false, and it'll be ready to be attacked again. Now that should work. Let's test it out. Move my character over to my enemy, and each time it attacks me, it takes only 10 away from my life total, and I can only be hit once per second. Great. Now, if my player character keeps getting hit, the life total becomes 0, and they'll become less than 0. They'll become a negative number. We don't have any system built yet to end the game when the life total becomes 0 or less. We'll add that in the next video. We'll leave it there for today. Thanks for joining. I'll see you guys next time.